Psalm chapter 78. I want to ask you, does your family have a story? You say, boy, do we. I'm talking about your extended family, going back through your grandma, your grandpa, your great-grandma, your great-grandpa. I'm talking about a story of failure, in which everything for the people in the story pointed to success, but they ended up failing. I'm talking about the kind of story that is honest about generations gone by, even if it's a hard look at their faults and at their failures. Does your family have stories like that? Does your church have stories like that? Does your country have stories like that? It's important to tell stories of the past, even bad ones. We can learn from the past. We should learn. We must learn. We can learn and reflect on what not to do or be. We can be challenged on how to be and do. We can see the grace of God weaving in and out of all of it like a scarlet thread of love. Stories of the past can search our conscience, cause us to pause and consider our hearts, cause us to hold up a minute and ponder the path of our feet where we're headed in life. Stories of the past can also warm our hearts because God has done great things in the past, whereof we are glad, and God has been merciful in spite of the times in which He has had to get after His people. And God has made promises to His people and kept them faithfully throughout all the years. In Psalm 78, Asaph wrote a song about the past. It's a history lesson set to music that would instruct people in an age of great revival during the years of King David, the prominent years, and of course a lesson that extends far beyond that time. It was music with the purpose of obeying God's command that one generation would arise and declare His words to the next generation. If you recall in verse 2, this psalm was a parable. Jesus told parables. Many parables. He'd talk about things common to the people He was preaching to and then compare those things to spiritual truth. And that's kind of what Asaph was doing here. He was retelling an old family story of the children of Israel to cause his hearers to consider their God. And if his music could get the attention of the generation to come long enough to consider generations gone by, he could have a chance to convince them God was worthy of their hope, worthy of their trust, worthy of their remembrance, their obedience. Should not be that be the point of music, to consider our God and who He is? So what was the story Asaph was telling? It was the story of the children of Ephraim. The children of Ephraim. It was the story of a generation coming up who did not learn the lessons they should have learned from the generation gone by. And I want to point out why that was so. We were introduced to them last week. You look at verse 9 of chapter 78, the children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They kept not the covenant of God and refused to walk in His law and forgot His works and His wonders that He had showed them. Marvelous things did He in the sight of their, who? Their fathers in the land of Egypt in the field of Zon. So the psalmist is talking about the children of Ephraim, but then he's talking about their fathers, and for the next 40 or so verses, he weaves the story of the fathers and then weaves it into their story. You get to verse 56, and I believe it comes back around to them. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God and kept not His testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their who? Like their fathers. So Psalm 78 is the story of like father, like son. Sons loaded with potential who didn't make it. Fathers loaded with potential who flaked out. See, unfaithfulness is a sickness that is contagious. Before we get to how the children of Ephraim caught the bug and what it did to them, we must see how their fathers had the bug of unfaithfulness and what it did to them. So our message is God and the unfaithful fathers of Ephraim. Before we go anywhere else with this, I just have a word on the generation to come. And I pray I made it clear last week that our church has the responsibility to disciple the generations to come. And the fathers of our church have the responsibility to disciple the generation coming up in their homes. The first level of discipleship, sir, happens in your home. And the church is responsible to disciple, but if you have a son or a daughter, they are your responsibility first. And why is this responsibility so important? Well, without us taking it seriously, our children and children's children may not have hope in God. They may not know what God can do. They may not obey Jesus Christ's commands. If we don't make disciples of Jesus out of the generation to come, they may not be his disciples. Would you agree with that? It's important to teach them the ways of God so they'll be faithful to God. It's important to live those ways ourselves. I want you to picture a what if of our children and grandchildren. Generation and generations with multiple copies of the Bible, with all kinds of Bible knowledge and Christians all around them, and brought up in church around good people, hearing good truths and doing good things, and then they come of age and they walk out. This is a what if. And it's not too far from the truth, and by and large. But what if they get a family of their own and they fail to teach their children the Bible or take them to church? What if they arrive to the prime of their life and turn away from the living God you so love? What if they refuse to walk worthy of Jesus Christ and forget what God can do, and they don't seem to even believe the gospel? That would be a terrible thing to see happen. Here's what I'm driving at. The generation to come is responsible for that choice. That is true. Each generation is responsible for its own choices. At the same time, what is also true is this, that each generation can be affected by the choices of their fathers. The children of Ephraim made their own choices, yet they made choices, the text said, like their fathers. So please, 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 consider well what you are teaching the next generation, not just in words, but by how you are living. Because you can say one thing and live something totally different. I can. I do. From time to time. Consider well what, if you're in a younger generation, and everybody here is, consider well what you have caught from the previous generation by their life and by their faith. And I think that should prompt positive thoughts in our mind. I'm grateful for the things I've received. But I don't think we should be stooges and ignorant about the bad things we have received. Because we can catch behaviors that are not in keeping with the ways of our God. Consider whether or not a generational bug of unfaithfulness is being passed around like the flu. This section in Psalm 78 is about God and the unfaithful fathers of Ephraim. You know, God did marvelous things in their sight, verse 12 told us. When God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, he did things that left people floored, thinking incredible. Verse 13, he mentioned he divided the Red Sea. He divided the sea. The children of Israel are here, and the Egyptian armies coming behind them, and they're scared out of their minds, and the Red Sea's in front of them, and they are stuck between a rock and a water place. And Jesus, I'm sure he was involved, but the Lord, he parted the Red Sea, and he made them to pass through the Red Sea on dry ground, and then he closed the sea up on the Egyptians behind them. It was amazing to see that, to see those waters stand up like a heap, like big heaps of water, big mountains of water. Maybe, I don't know, I've seen videos, or not videos of the actual occurrence. That'd be intriguing, wouldn't it? Yeah, I saw it with Indiana Jones. No. So, I've seen videos or cartoons that depict this, and you can see the whales and stuff swimming. I don't know if they saw stuff like that, but I'm just saying that would have been an incredible thing. A lot to take in. That was a lot to take in, they might have felt. Incredible, marvelous. Verse 14 told us that as they made their way through the wilderness, God guided them with a pillar of a cloud by day and a light of fire by night, and God's personal presence was in their life to guide them along the way. They didn't have to guess where they had to go next, and when God's presence stood still, they just stopped and camped out right there. And when he moved, they moved. They didn't have to guess. They didn't have to guess about the next step. They just had to follow the Lord. In verses 15 and 16, he provided rivers of water for them to drink out of rocks. And they come to a spot where they need water, and God clave. That means it's like he took an axe and split open these rocks, and it's like this water came from great depths, like there was a great reservoir. I picture Hoover Dam in my mind, and surely the deep, deep waters that are behind that dam. And you think about what this is communicating, that God gave them water to drink out of a rock as if it was coming out of an unending supply of water. It's like rivers, like streams came out of those rocks. It's incredible. These fathers saw incredible things with their own eyes. Fathers, what has God allowed you to see? Say, I've not seen anything like that. Well, you've seen something. Has he delivered you from enemies and impossible situations in incredible ways? Has he guided you? Think about this, or has he guided you personally on your journey through the wilderness of your own life? You heard the voice of God. Has he provided your most basic life needs in deeply satisfying ways when there was no hope that you would even survive? And I could say this, certainly if you have believed the gospel of Jesus, God has delivered you from your greatest enemies. He delivered you from sin and from death. And you were in an impossible situation with your guilt before God, under condemnation that you could not remove by any effort of your own. And yet Jesus Christ, the Son of the Holy God, He took care of that in an incredible way. He died for you. And He rose again. And if you believe that, He's given you His Spirit of truth, who turns the lights on when you read the Word of truth, to personally guide you, the one who sits on the throne of the universe, by His breath, by His breathed words, guides you through this life. And He has surely provided for your basic life needs again and again, satisfying your deep thirst. So surely you can say, like these fathers, God has done marvelous things in our sight. Yet unfortunately there's a chance, and it could be a good chance, that your children will forget what God has done for you. You say, how could that happen? Well, the children of Ephraim forgot what God showed them. You saw at the end of verse 11. They forgot the wonders He had showed them. Well, how did He show them wonders? He did wonders in the sight of their fathers that surely they heard about. And you say, well, how did that happen? How did they forget? Well, the fathers, this is how this generation forgot. The fathers sinned against God in their heart. Did you know fathers can act like children? Fathers, have you ever been provoked by a child? Did you know fathers can do the provoking? Did you know that? Look at me funny. These fathers provoked God. Look at verse 17. They sinned yet more against Him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. Say, how did they do that? Look at verse 18. They tempted God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. They put God on trial in their hearts. Let's see if God will give us what we want. They wanted meat. They desired meat, not manna. What is it? Right. They wanted meat. It's not out of character for men, I guess. But they wanted that. In fact, they spoke against God, verse 19. Yea, they spake against God. They said, can God furnish a table in the wilderness? This is the same Hebrew wording, furnish a table, as you'll find in Psalm 23, where he prepares a table before me. And they're asking, can he furnish a table in the wilderness? They seem like spoiled brats, frankly, because they go on in verse 20, behold, he smote the rock, that the waters gushed out, and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? Can you hear their nasally complaints? That's just kind of what drums up in my mind, you know. Can he, can God? You just want to say, shut up. God didn't say that. I'm just saying, I'm just being human here. That's what it sounds like to me. And perhaps that's what we get to sounding like to God. After all he's done for us as his children, after all he's done for us as his church, do we have the audacity to provoke him and ask, can God really provide for our needs? But we go even beyond our needs. Can God really give us everything we want? And why isn't God giving us what we want on our timetable? Oh, that's dangerous ground. That's dangerous ground. That's what they were speaking against God about, the things they wanted. This was a heart matter for them, and it is a heart matter for us. See, we can forget what God has done and is doing for us when our hearts get dead set on what we want. This caused me to think about what James said, and I'm paraphrasing this, but he said, where do your fights come from when you're fighting and bickering and warring among yourselves? Don't they come from your desires, from your wants? You lust, but you don't have what you want. You shove others out of the way, even kill them, but you don't get what you want. You never get it, and you're after it. You don't have it because you don't ask for it, and when you do ask for it, you still don't get it because you're just asking for it so you can be a consumer of all the things that you want. God gives such behavior a stiff arm because that kind of behavior is at odds with God. In fact, God gets angry with people like this. You say, what? My God never gets angry. Well, if the God of the Bible is your God, he got angry with the garbage coming from the heart and out of the mouths of these fathers. You look in verse 21, it says, therefore the Lord heard this and was wroth. You see, the Lord was wroth against them because they did not believe him in their heart. He was so ticked by what he heard. You look at the rest of the verse. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel. You can read about this occasion in Numbers chapter 11. He torched his own people in anger. I'm reminded of what the writer of Hebrews said, and he said this to believers in Jesus to warn them. Let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. We need to embrace the grace we have in Jesus and take this seriously. It reminds me of a good old-fashioned Baptist preacher who would say serving God is serious business. Pastor Arp would say, we ought to take his grace and the gospel and church life seriously and serve God acceptably. What's acceptable to him? And have reverence and godly fear in our lives. Why? For our God is a consuming fire. And that's New Testament. You know why he was so angry with these men? Well, I'm sure it was something serious like adultery or murder or incest or something. No, not quite. You look at verse 22. Because they believed not in God. I'm talking about people who know God, believed not in God, and trusted not in his salvation. His red-hot anger burned men alive because of heart problems we tend to overlook as nothing. We don't believe God, so we start complaining. We don't trust his salvation, so we start griping. With him, with each other. These fathers had seen God. The next few verses would tell us, command the clouds above them, open the doors of heaven, and rain down manna on them to eat. They ate the corn of heaven, angels' food, meat to the full. God provided their basic needs time and time and time again in marvelous, miraculous ways, and in their hearts they taunted him. Can he? You just want to say he can. But in their hearts they simply did not trust him. I didn't stop there, though, because you look in verse 26 and you find that he caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and by his power he brought in the south wind. And he rained flesh also upon them as dust, and feathered fowls like as the sand of the sea. And he let it fall in the midst of their camp and round about their habitation. See, when they asked for things they wanted, he actually, in his kindness, gave them what they wanted, but did not deserve. And he's like, you want this? Okay, here you go. And he dumped it on them. They couldn't even count what he gave them. They got to eat the expensive plate they drooled over and get filled up on it like fat pigs. He gave them what they wanted. It says that they were not strangers, verse 30. They were not strangers from their desires. They were not estranged from their lust. But many times when you get what you want, that's really not a good thing. Because you look at verse 30, it says that, but while their meat was yet in their mouths, munching down on all their things they wanted, the wrath of God came upon them and slew the fattest of them and smote down the chosen men of Israel. God may give a man what he wants, and that could be the worst thing that ever happened to him. Said, you want that? You won't listen to me? Fine, go for it. Knock yourself out. You know what is crazy about all of that? They didn't seem to learn their lesson, because you look at verse 32, for all this they sinned still and believed not for his wondrous works. For all this. They still did not course correct. They still did not believe him or trust him, even when he did all he did for them, and even what he did against them to get their attention. And as a result, you look at verse 33, therefore their days did he consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. These fathers lived to devour the things they wanted. And you might say, well, have a little compassion on them. I mean, he was leading them through the wilderness. You'd probably complain too. The point is not the wilderness. The point is God took care of them and they never got it. They never learned. And so while their desires, their focus is consuming what they want and getting what they want, he is allowing them to eat their lives to vanity and emptiness, and he devoured their lives with trouble. You know, I consider that maybe American Christians, by and large, feel so empty and fight so much because God allowed their greed to overcome them. As for these fathers, this seemed to get their attention at least. I mean, because it says, verse 34, when he slew them, they sought him. It started within them a desire to actually seek him, return to him, and inquire early after God. I mean, verse 35, they remembered who he was. He is our rock. He's our firm foundation. He's our Redeemer. He's our sure salvation. Yet in this recognition of God, it was just talk. Look at verse 36. Nevertheless, they did flatter him with their mouth, and they lied unto him with their tongues. And talk is cheap, isn't it? You have to ask, why did they live like this? And why were they so unfaithful? Well, for them, it was a matter of the heart. Verse 37 said, for their heart was not right with him, neither were they steadfast in his covenant. He was faithful to them. They were not faithful to him. And you know what's amazing about all of this? God forgave them again and again. As you look at verse 38, it says he was full of compassion. He forgave their iniquity. He could have just wiped them out. And he almost did one time. Tested Moses' compassion, and Moses interceded. He wanted to wipe them out, start over with Moses. But Moses said, no, Lord, for your name, no. And he showed mercy on them, even in chastisement and judgment. He could have destroyed them many times. Many a time, it says, he could have stirred up all his wrath. He could have stirred up all his anger. But instead of just unleashing it on these pests, he held it back. Why did God have such compassion on them? Well, verse 39 says he remembered who they were, what they were. He remembered that they were but flesh, just mere men, a wind that passeth away and cometh not again. He remembered they were mere men who live briefly and then they die. It's quite an amazing story, isn't it? God did incredible things right in front of them that they could not deny, yet they persisted in unbelief and complaint and painting God into a box. And in spite of all he had done for them, they provoked him and pushed him until he said, enough. And in spite of all the chastening he did to get their attention, they still would not trust him. And when it seemed like they would, it was all talk. I want to remind us why God wanted stories like these to be told from generation to generation. Then I'm going to make a simple application to us all. Look back at verse 5, if you would. Remember, Asaph in 4 was saying, we're going to show to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength, his wonderful works. And then he gave the reason why. For he, God, established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might do three things, that they might set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. And he continued in verse 8, and might not be as their, who? Fathers. A stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. As we think about the fathers of Ephraim, God says to us who know him as Father, see the fathers of Ephraim? Don't be like them. Don't be like them. Don't be stubborn. Be steadfast with God. Don't harden your heart to him. Allow your heart to be hardened by the trickery, the deceitfulness of sin, and persist in that. No, God desires you learn to be faithful, to believe in God. And frankly, you have a choice to make today, as you do every Sunday, when you encounter the Word of God. You can hope in God, or you can stubbornly resist him with a heart that will not simply and sincerely trust him. That's the choice. Either you pretend you are God, or you actually hope in God. And you hope in God, you can remember what he's done for you. You can remember what he has done for his people. You can obey him and trust him and follow him. As Paul told Timothy, you can trust in the living God, who is the Savior of all men, especially of them that believe. Or you can just say no and insist on having your own way. And even over here, because this is what happened to the fathers of Ephraim, even over here, he can do great things in your life. He can remind you of the things he has done in the Bible. He can even take you to the woodshed, or for the younger generation, he can take you to the principal's office, as a good father would. And for all of this, you can still sin and fail to believe him, even when he has shown you his wondrous works. So I just want to ask you, as I ask myself, what will you do? And where is your heart? I want to remind you of what Paul said in Romans 8, and then we'll be done today. Paul asked a question. He said, he that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? And frankly, you may be here today and you may be a sincere believer in the gospel. And you can feel like God is leading you through a desert, leading you through a wilderness. And all the while, God is making sure you have everything you need. And yet the question is, do you actually believe that? Well, yeah, I see him do this, this, and that, but still. Well, do you actually believe that? Do you believe he freely gives you all things? Yeah. If it wasn't for him giving his son, you and I would have nothing. But if you don't believe he will freely give you all things, I'm talking about he's going to take care of your needs and some. This isn't name it, claim it stuff. God has promised, as a child of God, I will freely give you all things. And part of the all things is the wilderness and desert you're walking through. Because he's not just interested, he's not interested in you being a fat cat, an American Christian, where everything's peachy keen and everything's great. No, he is interested in allowing even the trials to come into your life. We were singing about it in How Firm a Foundation, I think, how that, or some other song, how even the trials are blessings, because God is after shaping you to be what he wants you to be as his child. He freely gives you all things. He meets your needs, and he allows difficulties in your life, and he brings things in your life. He even gives you more than one. He even sometimes allows you to have your wants, and if you're sitting back asking, can he? Do you believe he will give you freely all things? And if you don't believe that, and I'm not talking about, because you might say, yeah, sure, I believe that, but then live like you don't believe it. Same here. And if your life demonstrates that, if you don't believe that, then why should you even say that you believe God gave you his only son? But God did give you his only son, didn't he? And so what does that mean, dear folks? He shall freely give you all things. So it's simple. Choose to faithfully trust God from your heart.